This is clear execution of mass murder, and it is being normalized on your TV screens every day. It pains me as a human being that mass murder, mass destruction has been normalized. More UN staff have been killed in Gaza over the last 6 weeks than in the UN's history, since it was established 78 years ago. My friends, students, scholars, it is an honor to be back here today to speak to you. Allow me to thank President Isha Hedge and her wonderful team at the Union for this very timely occasion to discuss a very timely topic. I only wish it had been under different circumstances. As you know, a temporary ceasefire is holding and has been extended to allow the exchange of detainees and hostages from all sides. It is due to end the day after tomorrow. There is pressure to keep extending the ceasefire, including from countries like the UK and other international actors. However, we are still not hearing a full-fledged commitment to reaching a permanent, comprehensive ceasefire that we call for, and still the UK government is not yet in where we demand it to be. But Israel has publicly been adamant that it will resume its aggression once the deadline expires. We hope not. We have called for a permanent ceasefire from day one. A permanent ceasefire should not be controversial. We are looking at an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. These are not my words. These are the words of the UN, of the World Health Organization, of Oxfam. They come from medical groups and aid groups everywhere. The numbers tell their own horrific story. More than 15,000 killed Palestinians and buried under rubble. More than 30,000 wounded. Around 1.7 million people displaced, living in overcrowded schools, UN facilities, private homes. There is no running water. Aid has started trickling in during the truce, but it is still far from being enough. And absent a permanent ceasefire, it is merely a sticking plaster. There is a danger of starvation. People are queuing for 12 hours to secure bread to feed their families. There is a danger of infectious disease or diseases. And without an end to fighting, this disaster will only get worse. A permanent ceasefire should not be controversial. It is a humanitarian necessity. It is a moral imperative. So, my friends, it has been eye-opening for me to see the level of support Israel has received for what is a war of choice and vengeance. It has been appalling to watch how Israel has quite openly broken all the laws of war and still return this support, and I mean here by governments. Israel has deliberately targeted the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. It has bombed homes, schools, universities like yours. Gaza's biggest, oldest universities have been leveled. Mosques, churches, even bakeries. And there is a reason why they are targeting bakeries. Israel has done this quite openly. I'm sure you have seen these images. It has made every single Palestinian in Gaza a target. Effectively, it has categorized all Palestinians into one of three groups. One of three groups. Either terrorists or terrorist sympathizers or human shields. All are targets. Senior officials from the very top have deployed genocidal language, discourse. They have promised a second Nakba. They have called for nuclear extermination, annihilation. They have invoked biblical justifications for the wholesale slaughter of every man, woman, and child. I'm talking about the top. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu, by the way. They have called us human animals. They have publicly argued that all Palestinians in Gaza be forced into the Egyptian Sinai, the desert. They have done more. They have acted upon these prescriptions by action, not just words. They have pushed 2/3 of Gaza's population into the south of the territory, which is a very small strip of land. You know, Gaza is less than half of London, the size of London. I mean the strip, the whole Gaza Strip. And clearly indicated that they will keep moving until they are all out. The North has been absolutely devastated, and I'm not sure if devastated is the word, because what we are getting and seeing is beyond description. All hospitals in that part of the Gaza Strip are now unable to function. All hospitals. And even when they were functioning, they lacked capacity and medical supplies. Surgeons were forced to operate on the wounded without anesthetics. Please hear some British doctors who were caught in this, were in Gaza, and some of them are back now, and listen to the horrific accounts of treating children without anesthesia. Hospitals were forced to dig mass graves for the dead in order to mitigate the risk of communicative disease. It's pure horror, pure evil. Only 10 out of Gaza's 35 hospitals are still functioning. Those are in the south. There are, according to the United Nations, just 1,400 hospital beds now. That's all what left. 1,400. All of them are, of course, occupied. 30,000 wounded. So where are the other wounded? No beds, no medical supplies. And these are meant to serve the 1,400, 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip. This kind of devastation of civilian infrastructure serves only one purpose. One purpose. What is taking shape is a plan of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing. And this is a plan we see replicated to a lesser degree in the West Bank. Not just Gaza. There, some 250 Palestinians who have been killed in the West Bank as armed extremist settlers have been empowered by Israel's supremacist public security minister, and it was reported that he's handing machine guns to these illegal settler militias at the beginning of this whole situation. Villages in the West Bank, where Hamas has no control, villages in the West Bank have been depopulated. More than 3,000 people have been detained by the Israeli military since 7th of October, all of them without charge or trial in the West Bank. 3,000 without charge or trial. Sorry, I must have abused my codes. Israeli ministers in this, the most extremist, supremacist government Israel has ever known, have been quite clear about how they see the future. Israel will annex all occupied territories. And by the way, please dig, you are students of politics and international relations and international law. Dig every word I just quoted here. You will be amazed. This government says publicly, with many of its senior ministers, that they will annex occupied territory. Palestinians will be forced, they say, to leave or they will be killed. Go back to Smotrich, who's the finance minister, plan. This is unless they accept to live as second-class citizens, he says, in a state that has already defined itself to exclude them, exclude all the Palestinians. This is ethnic cleansing. Either you accept to be a slave in your homeland, or you will be forced to leave. Otherwise, the army will deal with you. You know what that means. This is the continuation of the Nakba that started in 1948, 47, 48, when 2/3 of the Palestinian people were forced to leave their homes and lands and wounded up as refugees, never to be allowed to return. So for those who wonder what Nakba means, you have live transmission in your own TV sets now. That's how they did it 75 years ago, and that's how they're doing it right now. They start by terrorizing the civilians, families, children, women. Out of all those killed in Gaza, 70% are women and children. They start by terrorizing the civilian population. Then they cut off basic needs, water, electricity, food, medical supplies. Then they destroy any ability for life. They make the area unlivable. So people are absolutely forced to leave. We lived it 75 years, and the plan is to make us live it again in the year 2023. So this is a clear transgression of international law. This is clear execution of mass murder, and it is being normalized on your TV screens every day. It pains me as a human being that mass murder, mass destruction has been normalized. That too is being normalized I mean the ethnic cleansing, the mass expulsion. And Israel is engaged in a direct assault on the so-called global rules-based order that some of you study its history, its essence, its premise. And literally, by the way, Israel is engaged in a direct assault. Literally. More UN staff have been killed in Gaza over the last 6 weeks than in the UN's history. Since it was established 78 years ago. More UN premises, shelters. That too is being normalized. The targeting of the United Nations. That too is being normalized by a state that feels empowered enough to call for the resignation of the UN General Secretary because he dared to call for a ceasefire. Journalists have been targets. More journalists have been killed in Gaza in the past 6 weeks than in any other conflict since record began. 6 weeks. It's simply astonishing what Israel is getting away with on the ground and diplomatically. And to hear people seriously debate the need for a permanent ceasefire while all this is going on is abhorrent. Abhorrent. And some mainstream media, including the very respected newspaper magazine The Economist, wrote an editorial recently in which they, and I quote, called a ceasefire the enemy of peace. Ceasefire is the enemy of peace. So, my friends, students and scholars, apart from the appalling lack of moral clarity of that whole policy conversation, to suggest that a ceasefire is the enemy of peace is to suggest that somehow there was movement towards peace before the 7th of October. And here I must remind you, because apparently, judging from the media coverage in this country and beyond, this is not obvious. The Palestine issue did not start on the 7th of October. I know, shocking, huh? I'll give you the quick rundown, very quickly. It's 106 years since the Balfour Declaration. Are you aware of the Balfour Declaration? It is 75 years since the Nakba. It is 56 years since Israel occupied the rest of historic Palestine. It is 30 years since the signing of the Oslo Accords, which were meant to resolve this issue in a two-state outcome. Not a day of freedom for the Palestinian people all this time. For more than a century. We have been murdered and maimed, displaced from our lands, slandered as terrorists, detained, dismissed, and for the past 15 years or more, simply ignored, completely ignored. The world, it seems, got tired of our issue. No one paid attention to the settlement expansion, the illegal settlement expansion across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. That is clearly intended to preempt any possibility of a Palestinian state. No one paid attention when Israel engaged in 6 aggressions on Gaza over the past 15 years, assaults that cost thousands of lives. A child who's 15 or 16 years old in Gaza now have already seen 5 wars. No one paid attention to Israel's immoral blockade of Gaza, which rendered normal life and a normal economy impossible. over a long, long period of time. The UN estimated in 2020 that the blockade had cost Gaza's economy 18 billion over the 10 period preceding that. No one paid attention when thousands of unarmed Palestinians in Gaza marched weekly to the boundaries to demand rights. 200 of them were killed and 10,000 wounded with many, many amputations. No one paid attention when we warned again and again that this situation was unbearable, that the status quo is not sustainable, that it could not continue. Not only was the PLO, which I represent, ignored when it tried to refer all these violations, clear violations of international law, refer them to the relevant international bodies like the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. We were actively opposed by countries like the UK and the US. We were turned away at every diplomatic initiative we tried to take. Israel was shielded every step of the way. You will be amazed how much governments go out of their way to shield their friend and ally, that is Israel. Even though the entire world outside Israel says it wants a two-state solution, it's a consensus. And it's a consensus that the illegal settlements are illegal and contrary to the two-state solution vision. What country opposes a two-state solution? Name me one country on earth. Only one. One. That is Israel. There is still a way out, but it would take a 180 degrees shift, my friends, in diplomacy. It would necessitate the world making clear that an end to the Palestine issue can only come with the upholding of international law and international resolutions. This is not a cliché. We have created these rules for the very purpose of situations as Palestine and conflicts in general. We have created these rules after the horrors of the Second World War. And this or that means there must be an end to Israel's occupation of the West Bank, of East Jerusalem, and of the Gaza Strip, while refugees' right to return and be compensated, must be honored. These are the international resolutions. These are the UN Security Council resolutions, the UN General Assembly resolutions. The easiest way to start this process is for the rest of the world to recognize the state of Palestine. Already 2/3 of the UN's member states recognize Palestine. But sadly, a handful of states hold outsized power in our international system. These are the states that need to recognize the state of Palestine, and they include the United Kingdom, especially with the historic responsibility of the UK. Moral responsibility, political responsibility, legal responsibility. Once it is clear to us, as well as to Israel, what the end looks like, then we can talk implementation. This will require several things. It would require political will and leadership. It will require stubborn adherence to international law and international norms on all sides. Not just Israel, on all sides. And it will require that Israel is finally held accountable, and all sides are finally held accountable. This will not be easy, but it will be, and it is, an absolute necessity. Not only on moral grounds, and not only for the Palestinian people, But for the sake of an international system, however weak it may be, this system, after all, is the post-World War II dream of ending, or at least civilizing, wars. This system, after all, is the post-World War II dream of ending, or at least civilizing, all wars. And it is a dream we are right now watching being buried in the ruins of Gaza, of Palestine. So it is our collective responsibility to stand up and make sure that our rules, our values, our humanity is saved and is firm. Thank you very much.